Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning for this, what we hope will be a really illuminating event. My name is Miret Mabouk. I am the director of, the senior fellow and the director of the Egypt program at the Middle East Institute. And today's event is on COP27. I think by the time we're done with this event, you will know a little bit. With this event, you'll know a little bit more about COP27. And we'll have a slightly better idea of the importance and context of this event. But I'm going to kick off by introducing our panelists. We are extremely lucky with our panelists this morning. And just to let everyone know, this event is live, it is public, it is on the record. We will be having a moderated discussion for about 40 minutes of our 60 minutes, and then approximately the last 20 minutes, we will open up for questions from the audience. Right, the questions will come to me, and I will hand them over to the panelists. So thank you again for joining us. Let me say quickly, a big hello and thank you to our panelists. We're going to kick off with Ambassador Mohammed Nasr, who is the director of the Climate, Environment and Sustainable Development Program at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Nasr was formerly the ambassador of the Arab Republic of Egypt to the Federal Republic of Somalia. He has had a long and distinguished career that has included a stint as the counselor for the mission of Egypt to the UN, and his work on the climate and environment dates back to the official Egyptian delegation to the meetings of the African ministers responsible for the environment in 2011, and he's been a member of the Compliance Committee under the Kyoto Protocol since 2010. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. Sarah Battuti, we are lucky enough to have as a non-resident with the Egypt program at the Middle East Institute. Sarah is an award-winning architect with almost 2 decades of experience in the field of green and environmental building. She's the founder of one of Egypt's leading environmental design and auditing companies, eConsult, which carries out the most certified energy-saving projects in Egypt. And she is also a UNFCCC Global Ambassador. And last, and by absolutely no means least, Professor Hani Swelem, who, if you look at his bio, has a huge list of academic titles and achievements to his name. He's currently Professor for Sustainable Development and Water Resources Management at the American University in Cairo. He's actually the founding director of both the Center for Sustainable Development and the MSc in Sustainable Development at the American University in Cairo. He's also coordinated capacity development activities of the United Nations for United Nations Water at between 2010 and 2011, and he's also with Aachen University in Germany as the academic director of the Department of Engineering Hydrology and the executive director of the UNESCO Chair on Hydrological Changes and Water Resources Management. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. We will just note that Ambassador Nasr has been kind enough to join us when he's actually outside of Cairo with not great reception, and therefore we won't be seeing video footage. He's on the phone with us. So Ambassador Nasr, let me kick off by asking you a couple of quick questions. COP27. Perhaps you can explain to us, I mean, where the UN begins and ends, and where the host country begins and ends. I mean, what are the responsibilities? I mean, what does it mean to have a country host COP27?
Thank you so much. First, let me thank you and the Middle East Institute for the invitation and for allowing for this discussion. It is very timely and it fits very much to our outreach agenda and approach, where we really want to engage with the different think tanks and different stakeholders who provide and exchange views and also listen to them, and for them also to listen to the vision of the presidency, which again is answering your question would be is very crucial. Just to clarify, what is the role of a COP presidency versus the role of chair of any international meeting? First, the COP agenda, we have to differentiate between 3 elements of the conference of the parties when it comes to climate change. The first one is the one that we all know, which is the intergovernmental process with established agenda, some additional elements here and there, but this is an intergovernmental process that has started 28 years ago. We are in COP27, so this is 27th year of countries, representatives are sitting there negotiating specific agenda items that are almost repetitive every year with this incremental progress in each year. They set the tone, they set the political direction, and they set the elements of the discussion. This is one. So this is the future look on the discussion on climate change. And also they assess the progress that we have made in light of different elements of inputs, be it country reports or scientific reports or other reports coming from different stakeholders. So this is the intergovernmental process. Out of this intergovernmental process, you have around 120 to 140 decisions coming out in the span of 2 weeks. So they are negotiated within 2 weeks. And this is where the COP president or the host country plays a role in facilitating reaching agreements. Why is it important to reach agreements on the intergovernmental process? Because even with the expansion and the increase of the different players in climate change, governments still are the tone setters, and they are still the ones responsible, and they are still the ones that really lead or drive the transformation and the transition. So there is a political dimension, huge political dimension. And here it is also important to look at the evolution of the climate change negotiating process, which was very environment related all the way until maybe 2007, 2009. Then there was a major change. The climate change process moved from being an environment-related process, environment-related negotiations, into a very clear political process. We all recall the Copenhagen 2007 COP, where you had, I think, more than 80 heads of states and governments, and then its outcome. And this was further confirmed having a Paris Agreement 2015 with the participation with the heads of states and governments from almost like every corner of the world. And then further in Glasgow, where you saw a participation of almost 120 heads of states and governments coming to Glasgow. So the process itself has moved from being a process that deals with environmental issues to a very political process. And why is it political? Because it's very much based on the mood or the model of development, and it relates to climate change is cross-cutting in everything, all the sectors of the economy, all the sectors of international relations, be it international trade, be it political relations between countries. Whatever you look at, whatever you think of, would have the climate change dimension there. So it is a political process. This is where, as you said, where do we draw the line between the UN and the host country or the presidency of the COP? One way to look at it is you have a set agenda with some additions that drives the discussions or the global change or the global way to deal with that with elements of climate change. So this is a set agenda that is discussed within the UN process, UNFCCC, and then comes a host country which facilitates and creates the enabling environment for reaching agreements. It is of course up to the parties to decide what they want to deliver at the end, but it is the host country which kind of identifies the challenges, where the challenges are, how can they bring the different parties together if they will be having ideas to bridge the differences, and then try kind of to shepherd the countries into agreements towards that. This is one part of it, which is the intergovernmental. In addition to that, you have the rest of the bigger UN conference, the bigger COP, under the what they call the blue zone, in reference to the UN controlled area, which is an element that has increased in its importance in the past 3-4 COPs after Paris, which is the informal process. Informal process has thematic days, so across the 2 weeks of the conference, there are themes in every day. So every day has a specific theme that ranges between finance, mitigation, adaptation, energy, solutions, gender, communities. All of those have specific days where parties and all stakeholders sit there and discuss, have panel discussions, side events, and try to come out with some declarations and understandings and even deals and ways to move forward. And then there is a set of initiatives that was mainly coming from the host country, with a focus of serving the vision of the host country, to say each host country has its own priorities that it would identify, and through the initiatives it will try to bring forward the importance of those elements in the implementation and moving forward in the implementation of actions towards dealing with climate change. So you have initiatives first done by the host country, but also other initiatives coming from other stakeholders, be it the private sector or other countries or groups within the bigger scope. You have the thematic days, which provides the space for discussions and panel discussion and side events every day from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Every 45 minutes, you have a panel discussion, and then you have the wider panel discussion that happens independently in the different pavilions. And then you have the intergovernmental process that is very focused on the outcomes that are decisions that lead the multilateral climate change process. Parallel to this blue zone, a UN conference, there is an area called the green zone, where you have the NGOs and private sector coming forward, the ones who are not accredited, because anybody who can enter the blue zone is only the ones who are accredited to the UNFCCC. So it is the hands of the UN, the United Nations in general, and UNFCCC Secretariat. Those are the ones who are registered with the Secretariat, who can get the badges and can be able to be in part of the blue zone. Those who are not accredited can always take part of the green zone, which kind of reflects some of the initiatives and the thematic days, but it happens out of the UN and under the auspices of the host country. I hope this clarifies it in a way. Back to you.
Thank you so much. It actually does clarify a few things, but I'm going to jump back a little bit to something you said a little earlier. You said that the host country identifies the challenges, in which case, what does it mean to have an emerging economy host a COP27? What does it mean to have an emerging economy attempt to identify the challenges and to shepherd all the stakeholders? Because stakeholders, we've got countries, we've got companies, we've got institutions. I mean, there is a huge amount of stakeholders. What does it mean to have an emerging economy take on this role?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, the agenda is already set in its generality. Second, the end goal is already set by all of us, in fact, which is a transformative agenda, transformation of the economies, paradigm shifting to low emissions and carbon resilient economies, and this goes across the board. So the end goal is decided. Time frames are between 2030 and 2050. The question is always, how do you move from where we are now into this phase of full implementation? And here I would say, I wouldn't put it in like an emerging economy, an African continent, a developing country versus developed country. Because when you are leading or presiding over an issue like climate change, with its political importance and cross-cutting impact on economies in the whole economic system and trade system, then you need to have the understanding of what does it entail in implementing, and how do you think that this should be done. And this is where the vision of a host country comes in. So if you take countries like from Paris all the way until Glasgow last year, the focus was, how can we operationalize the Paris Agreement? So the focus on the negotiations was, how can we agree on the operationalization of the Paris Agreement? Paris Agreement is more of a framework agreement, and then how can we operationalize it? Once this was finished in Katowice, and then we were coming forward into Madrid, then the shift between operationalizing an agreement into really moving into how can we implement it was kind of blurry. That's why the Madrid / Chile outcome was kind of challenging. And then we came to Glasgow, and in Glasgow it was clear that you have a very strong views based on science that this has to be done in a much faster space and on a bigger scale. And there was, I would say, as the UK presidency, what they had in front of them was more of alignment of most, if not everybody. So you have an agreement within the G20, you had an agreement with the G7. It was the green recovery after COVID-19. So the challenges were identified that it is recovery from COVID-19 economic impacts. Then the idea was, how can we do this recovery in the green way that will deliver into the our agreement into the low carbon future and climate resilience. So this was a very clear focus with a different international circumstances back then. And this allowed for the Glasgow outcomes. As you can see, it's very ambitious. It talks about elements even exceeding what is in the Paris Agreement. It was taking parties very strongly forward, reducing or advancing the delivery on the plans from 2050 to 2030, very ambitious when it comes to climate mitigation, kind of ambiguous when it comes to climate finance, but with a broader agreement, and the same on other.
So, Ambassador, I'm going to come back to you on
coming to this year. It is important to understand the global multilateral context of where we are now. And this kind of sets the tone for any presidency, be it Egypt or any other presidency for this year. What they need to look at is what.
Ambassador, your sound has disappeared.
Okay, am I back again? Can you hear me?
Ambassador.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Not really, no. Whatever it was you were doing was
okay. Is it
fine, but we've now sort of faded off.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we sound like we're having a bit of a technical thing. So perhaps while we fix that, I'm going to take the opportunity to, I mean, there are many questions that I need to ask you, but we've also got two panelists that I really need to ask them.
Just to make sure that you can hear me.
It's extremely faint, so no, I don't think we're going to be. Can you try again? Hello?
Yes, can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yes, that's perfect. So thank you. I'm going to come back to you on a few things, but there are a couple of things that I need to ask the other panelists, if I may. I'm going to kick off with Sarah. Sarah, I know that this year there are, first of all, I'm kind of curious as to what a global ambassador does. I mean, it sounds like a great title, but I know that there has been about 28 hours of work a day associated with this. So let me just ask you to start off with, I know that there are about 15 initiatives coming out of Egypt. Can we maybe talk a little bit about those? And specifically, I'm curious as to how you see the potential for the success of these initiatives, seeing as how many of these are homegrown. Please.
So thanks very much for including me in this panel today. So as you know, obviously I do wear several hats. This particular one is very interesting as global ambassador because you are representing non-state actors. And therefore, coming from the private sector and coming from that sort of that side, it's a very inclusive way to have us become part of raising the awareness for the issues around and about COP itself, and also bringing forward the thoughts and the ideas of the private sector and of the non-state actors to the conversation, to the relevant, decision makers and to government, essentially. So this is an important role in terms of creating, facilitating, and disseminating knowledge across the board over a topic which is now definitely, becoming more and more relevant. As you know, for the longest time, there has been a specific structure to COP. And usually it's viewed as, large corporations, large banks, government, civil society, but the role of the small and medium-sized enterprises still remains completely underexplored. And that shifts with, how much of a role they need to play, because also, young emerging markets include a lot of entrepreneurs and include a lot of micro and small, medium size enterprises. Usually they are on the receiving end of legislation. So for instance, you have large decisions being made like ESG reporting or carbon footprint reporting, etc. You have these mega movements happening, which is very healthy because it means that somebody is acting on the climate agenda. But definitely being part of that creation of the ecosystem is definitely better than always being on the receiving end when you wake up and you just finally find a law and legislation. You know, and then the sustainability heads in every department and every company, they start saying, what is going on? So this brings me back to your question about the 15 initiatives. I think it's a very healthy way of seeing, first, you know, what does the private sector want from government? They want a sense of transparency and a sense of dialogue, so that you know what's going on, you know the priorities of the government, they're sharing it. And so the 15 initiatives that we first heard about with the climate strategy, the Egypt climate strategy, they're very broad. I mean, you are talking about something that is very much aligned with the global SDGs. Within them, there is tackling, you know, climate vulnerability and climate adaptation and mitigation, and also financing. So it's all moving in the same direction. It makes sense to go from the global strategy, the idea of COP itself, bringing everyone together in order to strike these kinds of political deals and economic deals, but then to also have the host country have some clarity about the initiatives that it wants, and then interpreting that to the thematic days. So this is a good way to organize something very big that has many, many stakeholders.
All right, so thank you so much. I have another question for you. I think when you were discussing these things, one of the things about homegrown initiatives, as I understand it, is that it tends to make a difference in both the bankability, marketability, and the sustainability. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we're going to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer your question from a practitioner's perspective. Okay, so for instance, you have barriers to green buildings in our part of the world, for instance. For the longest time, the solutions have been, you know, you see amazing architecture and engineering ingenuity, you know, Apple's headquarters, Amazon, these carbon neutral projects happening here and there. The issue is that it's never one size fit all.
Yeah.
And the issue is that with technology and innovation, there has to be accessibility and affordability and some kind of familiarity with what's going on. So usually when it comes with homegrown, when we say homegrown, it doesn't mean that it's lesser technologically advanced. It's just that it has come out of a good discussion with the local academia, the local practitioners. It fits the scientific knowledge. It borrows what it needs to borrow, but at the end of the day, it needs to work here. And the technologies of climate change need to mimic this. You know, we need to have solutions that you can scale out, that are accessible, that are usable, that are not just only exclusive to those who can afford them, but exclusive to rural communities, exclusive to vulnerable groups. So these kinds of solutions, they're bankable, as you say, because they're tried and tested. And they're corrected and adjusted, like you make any product. If a product doesn't sell on a shelf, remove it and find out why. So that's exactly the kind of approach that we need to have and I believe this is why COP moves. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not on concrete block. It needs to move, and it needs to be reciprocal to where it is. Our region is young. The entire world is looking for accessible and affordable solutions to climate change. Innovation is very diverse, and that causes great opportunity, and it also gives amazing dialogue. And I think Solutions Day at COP is one of these great opportunities to showcase your regional, your local, you're also similar. I mean, they could be global solutions, but from very similar demographic and very similar bankability, etc. So I think Solutions Day and the opportunity in this COP to have such a diverse amount of thematic days allows for room for this kind of discussion.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to try and get back to Solutions Day and Egypt's recently released NDC in a bit. But first, if I may, can I please jump to Professor Henny Swillam, who has been waiting very, very patiently. Henny, let me ask you, this is, it's a big conference to everyone else, but this is what you do all day, every day, day in, day out. So, and I think one of your specialties is, I think, the nexus between food, energy, and agriculture, and how that links into water scarcity. Let me ask you maybe a wider question. How urgent are matters now, and how hopeful are you that that institutions like this one, that events like this one, may be able to point the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and for the MEI, and also thanks to my colleagues who are here, Ambassador Mohammed Nasr and my friend, I would say, Sarah Battuti, who are very active friend that I would love to see her always with new ideas and new contents, let me say. Also, thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of taking the responsibility of organizing and coordinating this huge event, COP27, which we are all proud of having it in Egypt. And I think having COP27 is a hope, as you said, because being hosted by Egypt, I believe the issue, yes, it's about homegrown initiatives, but it's also about being the voice of the South. That's for me a key issue, that we should be really speaking and making the voice of the South a bit louder, to be heard, especially when it comes to adaptation to climate change. I don't like to distinguish between both of them. Both of them are important, but there are a lot of countries defending and having enough voices when it comes to mitigation. It is our opportunity, having the COP27 and 28 in the Middle East, to speak more about adaptation, to speak about challenges facing developing countries, such as water. I mean, if water is not on the top agenda, what else? Water scarcity is a cross-cutting issue in all the SDGs. There is no SDG achievement without securing water resources. So there is no ending poverty, SDG 1, without having solution for the water scarcity. And the same goes for zero hunger. I mean, food is connected to water. Agriculture is connected to water. No water, no agriculture. No water, there will be hunger. So these are, and then you can move on and on. I can go through the 17 and I show you that all of them are connected very strongly, directly or indirectly, to water. So I see water is a key issue that we need to work together to position it. I'm sure it's included in the 15 initiatives. I'm definitely sure. I'm sure agriculture will come. I'm sure energy will be included, but we want to promote the issue of water security. Water security in the sense of food security, especially that we always see hope for securing food if we can secure our water resources. Egypt is importing 60% of its food. And it's not the only one. I mean, the entire region is importing food. The entire Africa is importing food. So we all have common problems that can be solved through innovation and technology, especially when we focus, as you said, on something like the nexus. And what is the interrelationship between water, energy, and food? And what are the developments happened in science and technology and innovation over the previous decades? I take the example of energy. If energy was not supported at the global level, especially when it comes to a technology like the photovoltaic. If it was not supported from different government, different organizations, different private sector entities and policy, then we couldn't have reached what we have today. We moved from 16 US dollar cent to 2 US dollar cent. So we reduced the kilowatt hour price in the last decade, the last 10 years by 90%. That could happen to water. We can do that if we can position water on the top priorities of the agenda of COP27 and make it a global initiative. Yes, we can solve the water, we can secure water for the future, and we can secure food, definitely. But we have to see in an integrated framework. I'm not speaking only about technology, because there is a lot of policy issues involved. There's a lot of raising awareness processes and activities that have to happen. There's definitely science and technology, R&D. There's a lot of these involved. And this is my hope, and this is my dream to see as one of the results of COP27, that water for food security specifically is positioned at the global agenda.
So let me ask you a quick, well, maybe two quick questions. One, why isn't water security right at the top of everyone's list? Because I think if the last, specifically if the last year has shown us anything, it's that water security, which used to be taken for granted, should absolutely not be taken for granted. But also, what is it? I mean, you also mentioned one of the things that people have been trying to use to maybe achieve more water security is desalination, which comes with its own set of problems. How viable is a technology like desalination in solving water security in the region?
Yeah, thank you very much for this point. Why water security is not always on the top agenda? Because it's not the problem of the big ones. So I'm talking to you from Germany, where I also work at the University of Aachen here. We are dealing with flood protection here. So even Germany, yesterday I was in the UNESCO event, and it was said Germany is not far away from water security, especially in the eastern part. So there is water, scarcity coming to Germany as well, coming to Europe, Spain, Italy. All of these are having challenges with water. Yeah, USA, I mean, California, we all know that. So the water scarcity is coming, but it's better to start now, because it's going to take some time. Water is, for me, one of the main results of climate change, plus, of course, the increase in population. Water is very connected to hydrological extremes. So that's exactly what we do. We estimate what is the frequency of drought that's going to happen in the future and compare it to floods. I can tell you, we are going to face more drought than floods. So climate change is impacted. The increased temperature is increasing the water consumption of all of us. All the farmers in the Middle East and everywhere globally will be consuming more water in the future when the temperature increases more and more because of the consumption, because of the crops. Otherwise, there is no agriculture. So this is going to happen. We are going to lose more groundwater because the sea level rise. There will be interference between the groundwater and the sea, so that the groundwater will be saline and not valid for being used for agriculture. So there's a lot to be speak about climate change impact on water and its relation to climate change adaptation. So the second point, desalination. I mentioned PV prices of energy produced from photovoltaic has been reduced by 90% over the last 10 years. This is one of the hopes, because 50% of the cost of desalination is based on the cost of energy. So now you tackled already big component of the desalination. And that's why desalination in the 90s cost 1 cubic meter $2. Today it's 60 cents, $0.6. So which means there is progress, but with 0.6 cents, I cannot tell you that we are going to sustainably produce food. We have to work more to reduce it another 90%, like what happened with the PV. That must happen. If you can reduce the cost of cubic meter to a couple of cents, 5 cents, 6 cents, then we can speak about sustainable food production, because desalination as it stands today, it's not sustainable technology. It has to be green technology, and that's not the case. So there are two issues to happen: reduce the cost and make the desalination as a green technology. These two issues have to happen in the coming 10 years at least. Otherwise, we will see more and more challenges with our food security and definitely water security.
Right, thank you so much. If I can just take what you said there and bounce the question over to Ambassador Nasr. Ambassador Nasr, are you back with us? Is the sound okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've been hearing all the interventions, so fine.
That's perfect. Thank you. So to pick up from where Henry left off, if you look at the website, the attention is being paid to adaptation, mitigation, and finance. Okay. Can you maybe just sort of expand on those points a bit? Because I know nothing will work without finance, but specifically adaptation and mitigation. Can we talk about those and finance, please?
Sure, but if you look at the website, you'll find it's you will see the thematic days, and you will see most probably, I don't know if they have put it or not yet, the 17 topics of interest that the presidency have identified. Just following on my previous intervention, just to highlight that in the vision of a presidency, as you mentioned, not only as an emerging developing country, but as a developing country, an African country, and a country that has been very active in the negotiations for several years, we identified 3 things. One, this COP is about implementation. So it is not another round of pledging and planning and pledging and planning. We have been doing this for so many years. 2, that we are facing a lot of new challenges compared to what was it in the last year. We have food crisis, we have energy crisis, we have a geopolitical crisis, and we have finance crisis, be it in the rising interest rates or issue of debt. So within this context, we are looking on how can we still keep the agenda, the climate agenda, on the top multilateral and the global agenda, but at the same time tackle it from a realistic point of view to allow for the implementation to happen and the transition and transformation to really happen. And that should take into its consideration the reality that in many developing countries, the issue of the social and economic developments are as important as the climate and environment. So we need to look at it from a holistic point of view. That's why one of the mottos that we have is just and ambitious. So we have the just part, which kicks in as equity and differentiate the responsibilities, but also that kicks in as a social and economic dimension. 2, that we will take, and we are taking into consideration what Dr. just mentioned now, food and food crisis and food security, water and water crisis and water security, together with finance. Why did we identify adaptation and finance as priorities? Because we already have had a clear agreement on what we want to achieve when it comes to mitigation. So the process now is to keep the ambitious moving and keep the implementation on the ground with a clear goal that happens between 2030 and 2050. And there we have like a lot of quantified targets and quantified pledges that can take us forward. But when it comes to adaptation and finance, things are not the same. What you have as an outcome from Glasgow is a process to discuss a new goal on finance and a process to discuss the new goal on adaptation. But on the ground, and the reality is, climate change will not wait for us. Its impacts are being felt in extreme weather events and slow onset events, both in developed and developing countries, but it has a bigger impact on developing countries because they don't have the means to deal with its impacts. 2, that finance, although we hear a lot of nice numbers of the trillions and the billions of trillions that are flying here and there, but reality is, 1, they are not appropriate finance, meaning that the instruments of finance that are being provided are not correct or are not in line with what developing countries are asking for. 2, that the discussion around the 100 billion, although it is important because it confirms that we are all committed to deliver on what we agreed to, is not even relevant to the needs of developing countries, which is assessed on the scale of 5.6 trillion from now up to 2030. And three, that the accessibility to this finance is very difficult. I mean, if you look at Africa, 80% of African countries are not investment grade, so they will not attract any of that 130 trillion that are out there. So as presidency, we have to bring this to the table. We have to have these discussions on the table. We have to have these discussions and clarify that another round of pledging is important, yes, but what is more important is let's see it happening on the ground. From this, we put adaptation as a focus as part of our initiatives. And as I said, on the intergovernmental process, of course, we can push for those elements, but the intergovernmental agenda is a balance between a lot of elements, be it loss and damage, adaptation, finance, mitigation, technology transfer, and others. But the informal process, which comes with the different stakeholders, and now they are major players in the climate change field, this is where we want to bring forward issues, new issues, even decarbonization. So even this energy intensive industries who are most probably high emitting industries, they have to come to the table if they have something to say that they are committing to decarbonize. So we are looking at it from a more of a practical perspective that focuses mainly on let's see these things happening on the ground. How can we scale it up? How can we replicate success stories? So success stories that are happening somewhere, can we replicate it in other places and scale it up? How can we bring in the philanthropies? How can we bring in the other solutions? We can bring ideas on the finance that does not need a lot of financial flows from public sector, but maybe looking at debt swaps as one way to deal with it. How can we bring down the cost of finance, which is crucial now with the increasing interest rates, which makes things very difficult to work on. Yeah. In addition to that, of course, bringing in the discussion on food security, bringing in the discussion on water security, bringing in discussion on hydrogen, which is a potential fuel of the future. So, and among all of that, as Sarah has mentioned, bringing in the solutions from the startups, the green startups. How can we bring the startups from developing countries to have a role there and really play a role and can be seen by financial institutions or interested philanthropies that can support them to really make the difference. So for us, it is a holistic approach that takes a social and economic and environmental dimensions together, that has a focus on implementation and the urgency, keeps the ambition when it comes to mitigation as high as Glasgow, even further, and keeps the focus on let's see things happening on the ground. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Again, lots of questions, but I'm going to take something that you said and bounce it back to Sarah quickly. You mentioned, a focus on energy-intensive industries. Sarah, Egypt's new NDC has come out. You mentioned, I think, that buildings are now under discussion for climate change issues. Can you just sort of expand on the introduction of industries and of buildings, and an industry that few people talk about but is massively polluting and water intensive, which of course are the construction industries. Can we?
Yeah, the IPCC released a report about maybe 2 months ago now that really talked about the role of the construction sector, the role of city planning, all the way from the architect to the materials that we use, all the way down to the developer. What are you selling? And it specifically used the term lagging in action, because it is lagging behind in terms of its role, an open discussion about the role of what kind of new cities and what kind of new developments and new buildings do we actually celebrate? And this is a very good time to look at this, because this is a sector that continues to grow. To be quite honest, we are always celebrating the bigger, the more engineering complexity, cost-wise, etc. We are still not looking at the construction and the building sector in terms of its reciprocity to the environmental disaster that we are living in. It's still, we are not being held accountable. I'm talking about as architects, and this doesn't exist from everything from your curriculum, in teaching architecture and how to make buildings and how to plan cities, etc., all the way down to the developer and what you should be selling to the consumer. So this sector has suddenly been thrust into the spotlight, which means that this is a very good time to open up dialogue. It's a very good time to talk about what are the systems, what are the tools, what kind of financing and support from the one end, which is from the financial enablement and from the technical side, but also from my perspective, from the end of the consumer. What are people feeling when they live in these cities now? And what are people feeling when they live in these buildings? Professor Hani spoke about heat. Heat stress in specific parts of the region is an actual term that is now should be on the brief of every single designer. You should be tackling heat stress. 30% of people's household income goes into cooling. It means that we are designing buildings that are not addressing this. Therefore, the machine is not working properly. Cities do not have adequate shading. We are suffering from overheating. We are suffering from infrastructure that is not capable to receive so much population growth and density. Transport systems, they need adjustments. And therefore, a real look at this entire sector means that there will be a paradigm shift. Now, this needs to be ushered in the discussion of lending, financing, technology, what COP26 was about, which was about the transfer of knowledge, sharing this knowledge. So you don't have, until today, photovoltaic technology remains exclusive to a handful, and then the rest of us have to produce, we have an abundant natural resource, but we can't produce it because we don't have the technology. We definitely don't want that in buildings anymore, because this does exist in buildings. We don't want that anymore. People are building everywhere. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is really interesting, is to look at the role of rural communities and the growth of villages and rural communities and their rights to climate proofing. And this is quite prevalent in the up and coming COP. It's a very good discussion to have. We've witnessed it in Brazil, in China, in Latin America, in India. What should our inhabitants, that's why it's called human settlements, look like? So shedding the spotlight on the inaction is an important call to action. Establishing a very, very, very robust way of communicating across this very diverse and very sophisticated sector is important, and really shedding light on successful projects so that we tweak our mindset on what is a good design. It's a good design that protects and gives people comfort rather than looking good on a shiny magazine. It's an excellent intellectual point to kick off. I'm very happy that it's going to take part at the upcoming COP.
Right, thank you. That sounds great. Let me, just before I switch over to Henny for something, we did have a question. The 15 initiatives that you mentioned earlier, do these come prepackaged with sustainability studies, or are there ideas that are put out there?
I mean, the initiatives are quite broad because they work on health. And they are interrelated now. So when there's a discussion about health and well-being, this is now, migrating into well-being in cities. We're looking at bulk cities and villages. What are the diseases there? What are the needs? What level of discomfort is there? And therefore, I mean, this is what I see from my perspective as coming as an expert to talk on specific panels, that there is definitely an interlinkage between the SDGs, Egypt's Vision 2030, and that is being identified there.
All right, thank you so much. Ambassador Nasri, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, very quickly, just to complement and add to what Dr. Sarah has mentioned. The 17 topics that we have identified were 17 topics of interest. The presidency has identified them as elements that might evolve to be a full-fledged initiative or can continue to be a panel discussion or a side event. When it comes to being a full-fledged initiative, it is an initiative that is a global initiative or an African initiative, meaning that it has to have deliverables that can be quantified within a time frame, and it builds on the existing ones. So that's why we are partnering with the relevant UN organizations on those initiatives. So they provide us with the input of what is happening, or if there are similar pledges that have been put forward and under any other organization. If I give you like a simple one, if we are talking about early warning systems, we know that the SG, the Secretary General of the UN, has has an initiative now for in a specific time frame to cover 80%, for example, with early warning systems. We need to know that, and this is what we are doing now. We are collecting all the data and then trying to focus, have them climate focus with the social and economic dimension, to have partners cross-cutting. So from stakeholders, be it private sector, countries, developed and developing countries, UN organizations, and then we kind of streamline clear targets during a specific time frame. And this is the aim. If the topic and the discussion around the topic does not evolve to have clear deliverables, then it will not evolve to be like an initiative coming from the presidency. If it evolves beyond having like this and becoming very ambitious with clear support coming from international institutions, it can even evolve to be a presidential initiative. But for the time being, there were 17 topics of interest that we identified that, as Sarah has mentioned, goes all the way from nutrition to health to sustainable cities to sustainable transport, all the way to energy and others, and finance, of course. So they are like a spectrum that covers everything under the climate change. It is not Egypt specific. It is more of building on a success story that we have in Egypt or in one developing countries or in Africa, and trying again to expand it, building on what has been put forward within the UN system or beyond globally. I hope this clarifies the 17 topics in a way. I know it's kind of confusing, but this is where we are now. Thank you.
It does actually. Thank you. Let me jump quickly to Henny, because we're actually running out of time. But I need to ask you, Henny, you recently headed a model that actually got the top award for a model for agriculture in the Mediterranean. Can we? I'm sort of looking to you to be a ray of light in this discussion. How hopeful are you that the region is going to be able to come up with appropriate agricultural models to deal with the extra stress being placed on agriculture with dwindling resources and growing populations?
Yeah, thank you. To be very specific on this issue, I mean, we have been starting a model of nexus model integrating what we call the 3S, the sun, the seawater or the salty water, and the sand. So out of these 3S, we should be able to produce food. And that's what I see the hope for the entire MENA region. And also many other countries that are suffering from water and food insecurity. So this model, just for the credibility, has won the Nexus Award of 19 competing countries at a scientific level in the last month. And now it's going to be hopefully the award of being the most promising upscalable model for the Nexus. It's going to be awarded this certificate or award. It's going to happen during the COP27 from the PRIMA, which is one of the European Commission funding mechanisms. So to come to the structure of this model, as I said, it's based on the solar energy and transferring it to an energy that supply a high-tech desalination technology with the energy to produce water with different quality. Because the challenge we always face as scientists, we always think, okay, how much it's going to cost me to desalinate water at a quality of drinking for agriculture. I don't need to desalinate water for drinking to be used for agriculture. So we are desalinating water with completely different concept and completely different technology to come up with water suitable for agriculture, not necessary for drinking. And this will reduce the cost. And we do have a lot of publications on that. And the important part and the most important key issue here is the byproduct. Because we are expanding in desalination everywhere in the Middle East without investing time to think about the byproduct, which is very harmful for the environment, for the ecosystem, for the coral and the seas, etc., etc. And we do use this byproduct for producing different products. We are producing what we call artemia and algae that can be used as feed for fish or can be used for producing energy, or algae is used for many applications. So that's a closed loop model that we call 3S model, but it's also a zero liquid discharge model, so that you don't dispose anything to the environment back, but you produce different types of food, which makes sense and be an economically visible model to cover the cost of the technology and the cost of desalination. That's the most important part. So environmentally, socially, and economically visible, then we can say this is a sustainable model. Of course, we are not ready to go to the market. That's why we are promoting an initiative for not to get money, but at least to move many researchers at the global level, industry, government, to support such ideas so that we can come up with a solution for the water and food security.
Okay, that sounds brilliant. And it's okay to try and get money. I think you should be trying to get money for this. Ambassador Nasser, let me ask you for a quick question because we're rapidly running out of time. We've got two questions. I mean, the COPs, as you mentioned, are political animals. And I think we all saw Glasgow last year that apart from the discussions, there were myriad demonstrations, and Egypt is going to see myriad demonstrations, whether it's on human rights, whether it's on civil society, whether it's on indigenous peoples. How is Egypt going to handle the demonstrators? Will people be allowed to demonstrate?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, but this is a UN conference. So as a UN conference, all the rules and the regulations apply in there. So you have a code of conduct, one, and everybody who comes to attend this conference have to abide by it. Two, it is a conference that allows for the different stakeholders, and of course, and NGOs and civil society are integral and important part of it. Usually they are almost like 1/3, if not 1/2 of the participants come from the civil society, which is varieties. And three, it is agreed that, I mean, we have this year is a civil society year in Egypt, and there is a very clear, approval and acceptance that this is going to happen. I don't know where the question is, from the participation to the demonstration, as long as they follow the UN rules and the code of conduct. UN rule says that it is very clear that how can they do stuff and how can they do the demonstration, organize it. They have to coordinate with the local authorities. They do not obstruct the work that is happening in the conference center. So those are elements that we all know and we all agree to. Two, that they have to follow rules. I mean, rules are put there to regulate, and it is not there to obstruct. So, and we are taking all the necessary steps to make it as easy for all participation and all demonstrations to come forward and express their views and present them. And three, this is an issue that has a cross-cutting impact. So it has a social dimension, it has economic dimension, of course, it's climate in its essence and core. So this is the expectation. I mean, the demonstrations are like what I have seen, and since I have joined since 2007, we're very much focusing on putting pressure on those who are sitting in there from the governments, be them attending the ministers attending the high-level segments, or the negotiators sitting there, or the decision takers, or even the stakeholders from private sector, to feel the pressure coming from the people. Who are represented by NGOs and CSOs, focusing on let's do the transition, let's move faster than what is being put forward there. So this is, I think, with this in mind, I think it will be, I mean, the role will be very important. And this is the expectation. The focus is, of course, on everything, but the focus mainly is let's put pressure on those guys sitting in the blue zone inside, trying to move things forward on climate change and make things happen, because they need to hear the voices of those who are on the ground, the grassroots organizations. This is one. Two, just to highlight that we as Egypt presidency, when we did the analysis at the beginning, we saw that the voices from, the participation from NGOs from developing countries, in particular African countries, was very limited to compare to the participation from NGOs from developed countries. So we are working with the Secretariat to bring more NGOs from the South. So more NGOs from Africa, more NGOs and CSOs from Egypt, who were not accredited, as I mentioned at the beginning, so they didn't have a chance to participate. We are trying to bring in something like a single-time accreditation or some sort of facilitation where all of those who were not aware or who couldn't even engage because they didn't have the means on the climate change process, they are there and they are bringing their voices and they are taking part in this big discussion. So this is where we are. Back to you.
Right, thank you so much. There are actually a lot of questions, but we are out of time. It really should have been an hour and a half. But I'd like to thank our panelists for giving us their time and their expertise. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. Please note this session will be posted to the website probably in the next 10 minutes or something. Again, thank you all for joining us. And remember that this is part of a series that MEI is doing on COP27. So do please keep checking in with us to see what new events and what new panelists are going to be posted. And I wish everyone a really great day. And I sincerely hope that this event goes off brilliantly.
Yeah. Can I ask like simple thing?
Yes.
Because I see some questions on the Q&A. Can I answer them offline? I mean, like, can I answer them now, like in writing? No, not.
I think you absolutely. I mean, if you want to take a shot at answering them quickly, I think we should be.
I can.
Go ahead.
Yep, I'm in your hands. You just tell me.
No, go right ahead. So, okay,
okay.
Climate displacement and refugees, will they be?
Yes, it is part of the topics that we identified. It is under climate change and not peace and security and sustainable peace, and it is being dealt with through the CCCPA, the Cairo Center, and it is focusing on the impacts of climate change when it comes to displacement and migration. So we already have this as part of the topics. It was discussed in the Aswan Forum, which happened like just a couple of weeks ago, and the CCCPA is taking it forward and working with other organizations to try to bring forward like an initiative there on climate change and sustaining peace and stability. So this on the displacement, it will be under that, and they're working with the IOM on that. The balance between climate goals, ambitions, and what's happening on the ground was, yes, can we have an idea in the terms of what countries want to see from the US, particularly in the context of the President Biden, the Middle East? How will actions take to address the energy and geopolitical crisis play in negotiation of climate change? Well, I mean, there we are saying that in the intergovernmental process, you have checks and balances, we have to accept that. But in the informal process, and this is why we are really pushing on the idea of the decarbonization, that even if things are being delayed in actions, but still actions need to be taken towards the decarbonization. Meaning that all those energy-intensive industries should start working together or starting working individually along their councils to have clear targets to reduce their emissions and hopefully coming to carbon neutrality, which is the decarbonization process. And we are having this space in a full day, a thematic day that deals with the decarbonization in its bigger picture. So trying to bring in the main focus of the Paris Agreement, which is reducing emissions to keep us below the 2 degrees and hopefully the 1.5. Okay, the last one is like sharing the recording of this meeting. So if there anything else I missed, please let me know.
No, that was it. And thank you for doing that. We don't often get people doing that. Much appreciated. All right. Again, thank you to everybody, and we hope to see you again soon. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing it. Thank you.